Hi, my name's Doris Terry, and I live in Victoria Place at the sound of Ginger the Barking Dog. And I haven't been able to be with you for a while because I've had some problems, but I'm back and hope to keep on doing interviews. And today I have two very exciting people, and Jackie Torrey and Mary Ann Meenan. And the reason I say exciting because they were some of the first airline stewardesses. I have to think that females, because they had to be female. I know a lot of us see men now, but they will lead us into that and tell us how it all began. But let's start with you, Jack, and let's see, where do we go? Start with how you got to be and what you
Okay.
did.
I applied to United Airlines,
Okay.
and the first thing she did was walk me over to the tape measure and measure me and say, "You're a half inch too tall."
Well, what was the limit?
And that was United, 5'8".
5'8"
And so
was-
my father traveled a great deal, and he said, "Why don't you try Northwest Airlines? Because they're a very nice airline." And he felt that they probably would accept me. And so they did. But
Okay.
you had to take a psychology test, a psychological test
Yeah.
first to make sure you were not a nervous person. And then you had to go through 3 interviews before they would accept you.
How long did you have to do training?
6 weeks was all you had to do training, but it was pretty intense
Okay.
training. They did want you to look just right, and so they put you through a whole series of things like getting your hair cut and trimmed just right, and it couldn't be any longer than such, and makeup and teaching you how to put it on, and also
Okay.
that you had to wear nail polish. Some dark nail polish
Oh,
to show
okay.
people that it had to be dark because they didn't want your nails ever to look dirty when you were serving. And then they tell you what's the best color lipstick to
Lipstick.
wear.
Okay.
And you had to have your uniform, of course, clean. Everything had to be just spotless, shoes
Okay.
polished and all of that. When we flew, appearance was very important. And then, of course, personality, in that you were kind and gentle with people.
And which airline was this?
And this is Northwest Airlines.
Northwest.
Mhm.
Okay.
And at that time, they were flying from Minneapolis is their home base, and that's where I was trained. And they flew from New York and Seattle, Chicago, all through Montana. There were 5 stops through Montana, and into Spokane, Washington, and down to Portland. Then they flew over to Japan
Oh.
and to Hong Kong. And
Now,
that's
what
all they
year
did
was-
at that time.
what year-
Alaska. I forgot about Alaska.
What year was this?
I went for training in the end of '57, and I started flying. December 15th, we graduated, and then I started flying the 1st of January, and 1 month later, we were laid off for 3 months while they adjusted the books, and then we started again the 1st of April.
Ah. Well, how about you? It is Mary Ann, isn't
Mary
it?
Ann, yes.
Give us a little bit of your history then. How you got involved and et cetera, and which airlines?
Well, it was United Airlines, and it was 68 years ago.
Ooh, okay.
1943 I began.
Okay. Okay.
And we were flying the DC-3s, which had 21 passengers. And I was always based in Chicago
Okay.
because my family lived outside of Milwaukee, and I could get home and see them and still have flying
Okay.
privileges. And I flew to Cheyenne and Denver and Boston, New York, and Washington. So
Oh,
I
so you
was
did
flying
both.
into Washington during the war. It was very, very thrilling and exciting.
Ooh,
So
I'll
it was a
bet.
good time.
I'll
yeah,
bet.
So, yeah.
And how long did you remain a stewardess?
I flew until 1947, the end of 47, and then I got married. And of course, in those days, you
Yeah.
couldn't be married and be working for them. And
Okay.
incidentally, Jackie mentioned the fact that the stewardesses were all female, but Eddie Rickenbacker
Oh.
apparently didn't have much of an opinion of women because he was the only airline that had nothing but stewards on. He had very handsome stewards.
Okay.
And I can remember our pilots all had stock in Eastern because it was the only airline that was really making money. So,
Well,
and I got a kick when you said all the stewardesses were women. They weren't. But
okay.
United did not hire males until, well, it was after 47, and then I don't know because that was when I was already gone. So, you
Okay.
know.
Well, I remember, and that's what reminded me that this would be a good topic, saw some old-time flicks that they put on showing the early stewardesses getting on planes, and I thought, gee, that'd be interesting if we had one. And then I happened to meet Jackie, and she said, oh, yeah, I was in the airline. I said, boy, my head went up, and I said, we got to talk about this. Knowing that the airplane really isn't that old in terms of a machine, but I guess in the 20s is when it really started to grow after World War I.
And then in the 30s.
30s.
A woman named Ellen Church and a man named Steve Simpson, both from United Airlines, got to thinking if nurses were on board the airplanes, it would give a feeling of comfort
And security.
and security, and more people would fly.
Yeah.
And they really started stewardessing on airlines.
Okay.
And that was 1930. And I have a picture of them. The first, I think they were like 10 girls, I can't remember, a small number. And they had on these hideous tams and capes and
Oh, yeah.
shoes that tied, you know. And then underneath it says, any man would love to marry an airline stewardess.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were the worst looking things you ever saw,
So,
Were they nurses at that time?
yeah, they were nurses. All of them were
Okay.
nurses. So, yeah. Did you know Sue Clay come here at Riderwood?
No.
Well, Sue was here. I didn't know her, but she was with United. And she had been a nurse with United and quit to go into the war.
oh,
Very interesting. I didn't meet her until I came here, but now they're both gone, she and her husband. Her husband was a fighter pilot.
oh,
And he was shot down and taken prisoner and finally released.
wow.
And Sue was his nurse, and they finally married. But
Okay.
yeah, Sue was one of the oldest, should I say, stewardesses that I ever knew. But she was a lovely lady, and she passed away not too long ago. And her
Okay.
husband, so
But your last name is Meenan, M-E-E,
with an N,
with Meenan.
Meenan,
Okay, not
from
Meenan.
Tyrone.
Yeah, okay. It couldn't be Irish, could it? So, tell me a little bit about your background then, Jackie, and how you got in some of your stories.
Some of the stories of when I was flying? Okay, I started with the DC-3 that Marianne and I both flew because I was the most junior in my class.
Okay.
And because I was the most junior, everybody else got to pick where they wanted to be stationed. Most of them wanted to stay in Minneapolis, so they could fly to New York, or they'd fly to Chicago. They'd fly through Detroit. They would fly to Seattle, but they'd come back to Minneapolis. But they needed one person out in Seattle, so they sent me, and I was devastated because my family was in New York.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so that's how it started. So when they laid us off, it was really a big thing to me,
Yeah.
because I was so far from family. But I decided that I would not be able to, I probably wouldn't come back if I went home.
Yeah.
So I stuck it out. My parents supported me in my decision, and so it was a long 3 months. But
Yeah.
then we got started, and things went swellingly.
Right.
But I was on that DC-3, and they would assign me as the most junior girl to fly from Seattle to Spokane, Spokane to Portland, Seattle to Portland, Portland to Spokane, and then we would puddle jump through Montana, 5 stops through Montana. And then we would stop in Billings, stay overnight, and then we'd puddle jump back. And the neat thing of that was the same salesman would fly, and the same grandmas would be going to visit their family, besides the other people, and it was 21 people. And it was not pressurized.
Oh.
One of the
no,
flights, there was a
no.
huge storm in the pass between Bozeman and Missoula, and we had to go above it at 10,000 feet
I
without
remember
being
that, yeah.
pressurized. I had the biggest headache in the world for about 3
I
days
was
afterwards.
exhausted. I
It was
think, why are you
When
so
did they
tired? Because I just walked from Chicago to New York at 10,000 feet.
When did they start pressurizing planes?
Well, the DC-4 was flying then, and it was pressurized, and so was the 6.
So how do they pressurize them? Do you have any idea?
I don't.
Okay.
No
I was just
idea.
curious when they say that.
Yeah.
It means that everything inside is as normal as we are right now.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, yes.
So, well, that's interesting. I've never talked really to people who, like, as you two were, back in the 40s.
Behind
and so
the
on.
scenes.
Yeah, behind the scenes. And
I have to tell you, this puddle jumper that you were on, we used to call it the vomit clomet.
It's true, it's
On a hot
true.
summer day, you'd go up and down and up and down, and everybody would get sick on board.
oh my God, that would, I can't even imagine. Because I get sick riding on streetcars, and the first time, you know, I tend to get air sick too, but not now.
Right.
But the first time I flew, yeah, yeah. And
I'll tell you too, Doris, that one of the things that we had to do when we were training was fly from Minneapolis down to Chicago.
okay.
And that was your first training.
Yeah.
Well, when you go through Minneapolis, there's many, many lakes, and they would train us on a Boeing Stratocruiser, which was a double-decker
Oh yeah.
airplane. And so you had to go down the spiral staircase carrying drinks when you're serving people their snacks or whatever. And I'm walking with 2 trays like this down the aisle, and all of a sudden the bottom dropped out. And I took 3 steps. The senior stewardesses at the other end are going,
Yeah.
and I landed, and I didn't spill a thing, and I kept running, walking. And we all said, oh my goodness, how did that happen?
I imagine that must be a weird feeling.
It was
to
a
be
very
walking
weird
and
feeling.
all
I
of a
was
sudden
so
you're
new.
not.
I was so new at that point. It really
Wow.
was. But it was fun.
Oh, it's fun.
Sure.
Well, how many stewardesses were there in the beginning? I mean,
That's a
Oh,
good
that's
question.
a good question, and I have no idea.
they didn't decide to hire you all at once, or was it one airline at a time, or when did the idea come about, and
Oh,
that kind of thing?
well, it was originally those 10, right?
Yeah, in 1930
Right.
with the nurses, but I don't really know how many, nor do I know how many they have today, but it must be a phenomenal amount. Yeah.
Right.
I'm just curious because I know it was always nurses. Now they don't have to be.
No.
They have to have
I
any
didn't have
medical
to be.
training.
Well, when
you
I
get first
started,
aid.
you had to have a college education. But now, and I don't quote me on this because I'm not sure, but I think if you have 2 years of employment at United, that you can then become a stewardess. But I'm not terribly certain of that. I've only heard it, so, yeah.
I hadn't finished college when I applied, and yet they took me, but you had to go through that psychological first.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
We
So-
trained over the hangar, which was a little noisy, but it was fun. So yeah, it was in the upper level of the hangar, and they'd rev up the engines. And it was fun. It was
Okay.
fun. We were all excited about it.
Well,
It's an exciting atmosphere.
what is, if anything, your worst experience flying, or maybe you never had one,
Oh,
or relate to us?
Doris, can I tell you, I kept a rosary in my pocket. And everybody would look at you to see if you were panic-stricken or if you were smiling.
Okay.
So I'd be saying my rosary, smiling at everybody and
Okay,
terrified.
okay.
I can tell you the very last flight I had traded with, because I was only 2 years and many of the girls were 10 years. They were the ones that flew to Japan. They were the ones that flew to Alaska, and I did
Oh.
have a few Alaskan flights. And they were also the ones who flew to Hawaii. And my brother